And welcome to another episode of Loosely Scripted, the podcast with no script and, more importantly, no rules. I'm your host, Bach. Thank you so much for joining us. Today's show features a guest we've actually seen pretty frequently over at the Nerd Street office, as well as in many Nerd Street broadcasts, more specifically and more recently in some of the Nerd Street Gamers Valorant broadcasts. Why don't we just go ahead and bring him in, Mr. Michael Winnick, also known as DarfMike. How's it going, bud?
It's going great. How are you doing today, Mark?
I am doing just about as good as I can. Yesterday was a great day. We got new appliances, and I got all excited as an adult getting new appliances. That's a weird thing.
What'd you get?
We got new washers and dryers. Or new washer and dryer.
That's pretty sick.
Washers and dryers makes it sound like we got multiple washers and multiple dryers. You never know.
Just have a laundromat in your closet.
But we bought our house 7 years ago, and the appliances that came with it were probably like mid-90s, I think. So the dryer was now taking 3 times to dry our clothes. So it was about 180 minutes per load. Yeah, so we bought some nice new Samsung stuff. Thank you, Uncle Sam, for the stimulus check. That definitely made it a lot easier to purchase.
Did you have is it like a smart washer? Can you play games
Not any
on it?
we didn't want to go for all the crazy bells and whistles, although it does like sing to us when the wash gets done, which is kind of cool.
Ooh.
Now, Mike,
But what's the song?
you've been actually I don't know. I think it's a spoonful of sugar. We were trying to figure that out yesterday. I haven't heard it.
Can you set it? Can you have like some death metal come out?
I don't know. I kind of want to like
finishes?
Can I upload music to it in Bluetooth? That'd be pretty wild.
Like Kazoo Kid.
It is a Samsung, so maybe it's got some smart features in there. Now, Mike, you've been casting now for how long? When did you exactly get your start?
I guess it's been over 3 years now. My timeline always gets a little bit fuzzy here. Philadelphia 10 was the first time I ever cast. That's when I showed up and sat down next to you, and that was the first time I ever cast. So that was, I think, 2017. I want to say January of 2017.
I'm trying to remember. Like all the Philadelphia's blur together for me.
Google will help.
Yeah,
me.
You go ahead and Google it. This is the power of being able to do home broadcast. He wasn't Googling that. He's just typing in something completely different. He's gonna remember. Channel that inner thought.
2017 to 15, 2017. So that's when I started casting.
So 3 years now, you've been casting. More specifically, Counter-Strike. You've gotten involved in other titles, dabbled a little bit here and there, but you're now getting into Valorant as well. When you started getting into casting, did you think, like, I want to do this full time? Or was it just kind of like, this is fun?
So it was a weird time in my life. It was sort of a transitionary period in terms of a job, and I was looking for a thing and sort of a direction to head in. I'd been working in sailing for a while and didn't think that was really going to be it's something I very much enjoy, but it wasn't going to be like my thing in my career. And so when I first started casting, I thought it was a wonderful time. Like I just sat down on the microphone. Literally, I saw a Reddit post for Frag 10. That's how I found out about the tournament. There's a Reddit post that was talking about the tournament and saying, come compete or come out and watch. And then there was a tiny footnote that was like, oh yeah, we'll also do open casting. So if you want to try out, we'll put you on the mic and give it a go. And I sent a message asking more details about that and wound up getting told that if I didn't suck, they'd leave me on for a while. And if I did, they'd kick me off. So I had some free time. I went to Philly, did that tournament, and I fell in love with it pretty quickly. I don't think right off the bat, I just definitely didn't think, oh, this is going to be a career. But I thought this is something I'm interested in. And then sort of by that summer, I would say we did the GexCon 2017 that summer. You and I actually did that together along with the Philadelphia crew. That was sort of that was the first time I got paid for any of this. And that was where in my brain, it was like, okay, this could be something. So I sort of gave myself a timeline where it was like, okay, let's pursue this fairly seriously, see what we can do, give it, a year, 2 years to see where this winds up. And if I see a path at the end of 2 years, keep pursuing. And if I don't, figure something else out. So pretty quickly, I guess I'd say that I decided this was something I wanted to seriously pursue in a work-like way.
Now, looking at your past, was there ever like moments where you're like, I have a good voice. I should talk to people for a living? Because one of the things that people constantly say to us as casters, and I personally have never heard it with myself. Like I've heard people have told me like, oh, I find your voice so soothing. And I'm like, you should see a doctor about that. Because I hate the sound of my own voice.
I do too.
But But do people or have people in the past told you regularly, oh, you got a nice voice, you got a voice for radio, or maybe a face for one too?
Yes, I'm a loud person in general. I was a loud child. You're laughing because you know me.
Mm-hmm.
Trust me, I've mellowed with age. I was
Mm.
a loud child. I was a ham. I like to be the center of attention. I was a theater kid. I did shows and productions. I mean, I've been seeking the spotlight in some way or another for a long time. Not I say that. I'm not hmm. I'm not always the most attention seeking nowadays, but I definitely was when I was younger. So a lot of people thought I was going to wind up in something, whether it be radio or performance. My grandfather always wanted me to be a lawyer. He thought we
Mm.
needed a lawyer in the family, and I would be good for arguing. That one didn't work out for him because it turns out I don't like higher education very much. But
You and me both. I never went.
yeah, but yeah, I definitely it's a focus of mine, and it's something that I've always been good at is performance and talking to people and sort of holding the attention of a crowd and that kind of thing. It's expressed itself in a lot of different ways and different jobs and different things growing up. But the fact that I guess when I discovered casting, it was like, oh, this is a weird niche that all of my skills and talents weirdly fit into and slot into. So it made a lot of sense.
It's funny you mentioned that because I, for years, uh, in high school, was like, I'll just admit it. I may be bald now, but my hair used to be very long, down to my shoulders at its
I still
longest.
want to
But
see
usually,
photos.
like, and I had long bangs. I'd sweep them to the side. I'd do the head toss.
I need
Uh,
these photos.
I had my lip pierced on both sides, and I remember like basically encountering friends like years later, and they're all like, "So what'd you end up doing?" And I would just tell them where I was at, and they're like, "I just assumed you'd like end up like traveling the world in a band or something." And I'm like, "Why?" I'm like, "Well, first of all, the look." And I was like, "Well, that's kind of a weird reason." And they said, "But you also always were a performer." And I was like, "Well, I didn't really see it that way." And they're like, "No, you were. You just didn't realize it." I'm like, "Okay." And now that I look back too, when I was younger, I was really into doing like all the plays at school and
Yeah.
performing. The second I stopped, and I remember this very vividly, was when they started introducing musicals. And I was like, "Nope, that's where
I
I
was
draw the
never good
line."
at those either.
And the funny thing is, like, I know I can sing. I just didn't want to sing in front of people. There was no way. And it started this really weird, like, shy era for me where I didn't want to, like, talk in front of people or get up
Hmm.
in front of people. And now I feel like I'd be comfortable enough to actually, like, just jump on stage and play music in front of people. It doesn't bother me because now I talk in front of people so frequently. And in fact, I encourage it. Have you actually gotten to work with, like, a legitimate live crowd before?
No. That was one of my 20 that was one of my big 2020 goals, and then coronavirus, so that one's tabled for the indefinite future. But no, I have not worked in front of a legitimate crowd, and that is something that's a huge goal for me in my career
Yeah.
because I love it. I mean, as we just talked about, I've always been someone who loves performance. I've loved theater, and there's nothing like having that crowd and feeding off of that energy. So I can't imagine. Well, I can't imagine, and I very much want to feel the energy of casting in front of a crowd that's going nuts for the game that you're casting. That to me is one of my huge career and personal goals.
That's the crazy thing about like this industry is I honestly never had a desire to like really jump up in front of people and do this, and now all of a sudden it's what I want to do. But I think a part of that comfortability came from previous jobs. Um,
Hmm.
and I don't know if you agree. Like, did you have careers in the past that kind of brought you into this world that made it easier to transition? I know what you did previously, but like, what did you do even before that? Like, let's go back in the DarfMike time machine and see what you were like early jobs for Mr. Mike Winnick.
Early jobs. I mean, my earliest jobs are actually very strange. I was a foreign service kid growing up, so we moved a lot and we were attached to embassies. And one of the features of that is that my high school jobs are very unorthodox because when you live in a foreign country and you have very specific resident status in that foreign country, you usually can't actually work in that foreign country. So the embassies have a program called summer hires where basically they have jobs and sort of internships and short jobs in various departments of the embassy for college kids home for the summer and high school kids above the age of 16. So my first couple of jobs were actually embassy summer hire jobs. I worked in the Office of Defense Cooperation in Berlin, which is basically an office that coordinates military cooperation between the German and American sides in terms of like defense
Mm-hmm.
research and things like that. So that was a weird job. I like approved visas for people coming to do weapons research in Germany, and helped plan an air show. Uh, that was, yeah, right. Like that's just I was thinking about it because I knew you were going to be asking me something along those lines. It's like, all right, what were my early jobs? Um, that's unorthodox, and I don't know that that necessarily played into anything to do with this, but it was a useful skill. It definitely helped me be more organized. I managed a database for them. I did a bunch of invites for a big event, that kind of thing.
Did you have to
Um,
speak German?
Not well.
But you did speak it
I,
occasionally at work.
Not in that job. No, everyone in my
Okay.
office was I was actually the only civilian. Everyone in my office. I think there was one other German employee, local. They're called FSNs. I think they've changed that name actually, but it stands for Foreign Service National. It's basically someone who's a local employee but employed by the embassy working for the U.S. government. Um, but most people in that office were actually military members, officers, which was interesting. You know, it was definitely more discipline than I was used to. They didn't
Mm.
necessarily apply it to me. I think they were pretty lax with me, but definitely not an environment I was used to. So that one less so. Then my second summer hire gig was in the GSO, which is the General Services Office. Think of it as like sort of the get things done in terms of facilities and that kind of stuff office. And most of the employees there were FSNs, were German. So there was a little more German around, but my German was never good. I was there for the last 2 years of high school. I was frankly lazy about it because we'd been moving so much. This was finally where I was just like, I don't. My German got to the point where I could understand conversations of other people fairly well by the time that I left, but I was never very conversational on my own end. I sounded good. I could fake the accent, and I'm a blonde boy with blue eyes. So people always thought I was German. I'd be walking my dog around the neighborhood, and people would come up to me to ask for directions, and I'd be able to give them directions. And then they'd ask me a follow up question, and that would be the end of my German, and I'd have to ask them to switch languages. So,
But you do speak other languages.
yeah, yeah,
A little.
yes, with an asterisk. My French used to be near fluent, used to be, and I would like to resurrect it. And occasionally it pops back out. I think of it as like, so I lived in France for 3 years before Germany, and I also grew up learning French. That was like the language that I learned in various schools. And my parents both speak French as well, so they spoke French to us. My brother was actually born in Paris. So we grew up learning French and then lived in France for a while. So by the time we left France, I would say that my French was near fluent. I could understand pretty much fluently, and my spoken was quite good. I wouldn't say fluent, but getting quite good. And then I didn't speak French with any regularity for years. So I guess almost a decade at this point. So it's rusty to say the least. It's sort of like the metaphor I like to use is it's like I have a filing cabinet in my brain, and French is in the bottom drawer that's kind of rusted shut and has a lock on it where you don't quite know where the key is. And if you spent a little bit of time, you could probably find it and get it open and get it out again. But it's been a minute. There's some cobwebs there.
Yeah, and there's honestly no need. Like, when are you going to actively speak French outside of just wanting to speak French, unless you're, like
Yeah.
talking to the French Canadian players in Counter-Strike or in Valorant?
That
I mean,
happens sometimes, actually. At
yeah.
Global Challenge, we've had a couple French teams.
Yeah, and I know
3D
you were
Mac.
actually you were listening in on some of the French comms when we were casting Valorant the other day, trying to understand what
Yes.
they were saying, and trying to read the chat as well. So like, even just looking at some tweets that come out around the French scene, you're like translating to make sure that the translation is accurate.
My favorite thing is the only regular use for my French I get anymore is Nell, the Counter Strike reporter. When he puts out an article, it's in French and then it's in English, and I read the French first, and then I see how much of it I could get. Which that's my only way that and French twitlongers, French player twitlongers. I like to read the French, and yeah, that's pretty much the only way I get to flex my French comprehension at all these days.
So you don't think that your jobs working for the embassy kind of ushered you into esports at all, but is it possible that speaking different dialects and communicating with people who are complete strangers in a different land has helped you in some way?
I mean, yes, absolutely, to some degree, and there were later jobs as well that played into it. One thing that I don't know if you actually know this about me. One thing that's definitely played not so much into the speaking part of things, but the performance and having no shame part of things. Did you know I was a mascot
Yeah, you told us this
in
story
college?
once. You mentioned it, but I couldn't remember what you were a mascot of, like what your mascot was that you wore.
I was the fighting Quaker for the University of Pennsylvania for a time, which it's a giant foam man with a tricorn hat and a disturbingly broad smile. They've actually redone the Quaker now, and I hate the new costume because he looks like a hipster who should be hitting a vape instead of like a friendly Quaker.
Mm.
Um, but the old costume was this big chunky boy, um, and it was very very absurd. I mean, mascotting in general is just super absurd, uh, completely ridiculous, and it's a lot of fun. It's very much performance, and so that one definitely played into it. That wasn't a job. I didn't get paid anything. I don't know how I decided that it would be a good idea to get into a giant foam suit and sweat my butt off for crowds, but I did. I decided that's what I wanted to do, and it was an interesting one. It's a lot of fun. I loved it. It was simultaneously sort of the best and worst thing ever because every time you got in the suit, you just got this sort of high of, okay, I'm the Quaker now. Everything's crazy. Where you're dancing, you're reacting, you're high fiving tons of people. You're either making children cry or love
Mm-hmm.
you. It's one of those two things. There's no in between. Kids either loved us or were terrified. The smile, I think, really disturbed a lot of children. Made
Did
a
you ever
lot of
get
babies
punched?
cry. Not seriously. Um, I've had like kids who like they were like it was like a play fight. You know, you
Yeah,
do the like put them up, do the little fist, and like bop 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 bop, just sort of like
yeah.
the fake punching, and then they'd come back and like sock you in the thigh, and you're like, oh god, mm, that don't feel good. But I never had an actual human being, a grown human being, try and fight me. One of my fellow Quakers had to stiff arm a drunk guy once. That was a fun time.
Why
Guy
was
kept
that?
trying to pick him up.
Oh, okay.
Um, it was like at the equivalent of the spring fling for our college, or it's actually called spring fling. Basically, everyone gets together in one place and gets really drunk and otherwise inebriated off of substances. And this one guy became convinced that he wanted to pick up the Quaker, and he kept chasing him around. And eventually, the Quaker had to stiff arm him and run.
The life of a mascot. You know, there's actually a movie. Man, have you ever seen Best in Show?
Yes, I've seen the mascot one too.
Yeah, the
I don't remember
mascot
what it's
one
called.
by Christopher Guest. It's the same guy.
Yes.
It's pretty good. And you have like the fist and like all these other weird
Yes.
mascots. I actually love that movie. It's kind of underrated. It's not amazing, but it's good enough.
It was enjoyable, yeah. I love those movies. Waiting for Guffman, Best in Show, A Mighty Wind. Yeah, Christopher Guest movies, phenomenal movies. Big fan.
Now, when you started getting into this and you started to seriously consider making this your full time job, your career, what was the support like behind you? Because I think in general, a lot of people are like, I don't know if that's going to work out. You might want to consider doing something else.
My parents were super supportive, and I'm so grateful to them for it. They're wonderful people. I had been going through a very difficult time in my life. I talked a bit about the University of Pennsylvania. I didn't graduate. Surprise. Uh, I went through a very difficult personal period, a serious struggle with depression and anxiety issues that led to me being home. And then I started working in the sailing industry, which helped me get out of that. But my parents were super supportive, and when I started doing the casting and started getting excited about it, and really started to find a little bit of direction and some purpose in it, they were so supportive of me because they were super happy that I had found a passion that I could put myself into. And they also, I mean, they know me super well. Um, so they were also excited because they knew that this would be something that would play well to my strengths. So they've been behind me in a big way, and actually have been some of my biggest encouragers. You know, when I was talking about, okay, I'm going to take basically when I hit that point where I said I'm going to take 2 years, and my focus during those 2 years is going to be pursuing casting. I'll work other jobs, but I'm going to focus on pursuing casting. And if I get to a point where the job's getting in the way of the casting, I'll make the jump and go into the casting. And they were behind me 100% of the way, and really even encouraging. And I lived with them for a good chunk of that period. So they also welcomed me back into their home like a classic millennial. And so I am eternally grateful to my folks for being very supportive, They watch my streams sometimes. I'm not sure they always understand the game, but they understand it well enough to appreciate it, and they like tuning in. It's actually funny sometimes. My dad will send me a text about a tweet I put out or something like that, and I get that reminder that my parents sometimes check my Twitter, which isn't my favorite reminder to get, but I do appreciate them. I am so grateful that I had a strong support network, and I'm very, very lucky to have had that when I was starting out, and still.
Now, I have to ask you a question here.
Hit me with it.
What was it like performing in the Lyre? Because I just Googled your name, and I found this old picture of you. Apparently, you played, what is stagehand Michelle? Michael?
Yeah.
Michelle?
Yeah. So that was that. Yeah, actually, I'm going to Google myself now. What did you Google?
It is the colonialplayers.org, by the way, if you are looking for it. I found this nice old picture of you, so I think I might just tweet this one out later today.
You should absolutely do it. So the Lyre. Yeah, let's talk about the Lyre. I'm going to talk about performance. That was a great show. It was the Colonial Players is a community theater in Annapolis, Maryland. They're phenomenal. If anyone's in the area, you should absolutely go check them out. If you have any interest in performance, it's definitely worth doing as well. It's a great theater company. They do theater in the round, which means that the stage is round and the audience is all around you, which is a really intimidating but fun way to do theater. It's a fantastic spot, fantastic venue. They've got a great community. The Lyre was an adaptation of a 16th century French farce, whose name I forget initially, but it was rewritten and adapted for the future, and it's wickedly funny. Very, very funny show. It's basically the story of a good-for-nothing lout seducing his way into an honest marriage and then making an honest man out of himself. It's a classic farce. So there's the romance, there's the mistakes, there's the tomfoolery back and forth. It was a really fun show to be a part of. The director was phenomenal. The whole cast was phenomenal. It was a good time. And I played a stagehand, which you don't think that's that big of a part. It's not. But we got to do some really fun things. In addition to moving the sets and such of that, they incorporated us into the sets. We were sort of being standoffish Frenchmen, or French, a man and a woman, and just goofing around and having a good time with it. So it was a really fun production to be a part of. And we wound up winning the Ruby Griffiths Award, which is the award given out to the best community theater production of the year in the Washington area. So I won an award for it too, so that always feels good.
Do you miss the theater at all?
Yes, I love theater. I love performing. I don't have time for it by any means with casting. I mean, I just don't, because frequently, so for community productions, rehearsals are generally going to be at night, which is generally when the casting is as well. But I definitely do enjoy it, and it's something I would go back to. If some bizarre twist of fate wound up with me getting an audition for a professional show and me getting a gig in a professional show, I would absolutely take that. That'd be too much fun to pass up. Yeah, I've always loved theater, and I do miss it to a degree. Being part of a production is a lot like being part of a broadcast team, except that instead of it lasting a weekend or a week or something along those lines, it lasts months, and then at the end the payoff is huge of being able to perform what you've been working on for all that time. It really is it's a high doing performance at that degree.
Yeah, I mean, I think the same thing applies for doing a large scale event, which you work in front of a live audience, and you can feel that reaction coming in from both you and the players, because it's a combination of both. It's not just you and it's not just them, because the moment is amplified by you, but the moment only exists because the player's there. So it's a combination effort. I've only gotten to really work an audience that had that sort of effect once or twice. Generally speaking, as a caster, because once I transitioned to hosting, it's just a different atmosphere. And I really enjoy the hosting side, so I'm not going to necessarily transition back. But I always wanted to work a bigger audience to just keep getting that kind of that feeling from the crowd that you just get. When we went down to Rio for DreamHack, even though they were hyped for the games, like that feeling of just being in that
crowd
that arena.
Amazing. I thought they were going to tear the stage apart.
There was only 1,200 people there, 1,000 people. It wasn't that many, but it was enough that like they were so insanely loud. And myself and Potter and a few of the others. I think Niels came out with us at one point. We were all just kind of standing out by the front, like watching the screen, because there was a like 5.5 foot tall barrier in front of the stage, about 10 feet in front of it. So like we could walk in front of the stage and watch the games, but we couldn't get past it. We'd have to like go outside of the backstage area and go all the way around through the concourse to come back around. So we just stood out in that area and watched, and we had like fans coming up to us and like this game's crazy, and they're like asking for pictures. I'm like, this is just a cool atmosphere. Like everyone is so hyped.
Yeah.
I would love nothing more than to go back to that. That was one of my favorite events. And then we did that iBuy Power Masters event at the Orange County Fairgrounds in like 2016, I think it was. And it was me and Steele. And that event, the crowd was just awesome. There was like 2,000 people in this tiny little venue. It was really big for what it was, because the venue was really wide. So like they actually had the stage set up so that we were in the middle and facing out, which was probably my favorite part. We weren't backstage or tucked into a corner.
Cool.
We were dead center stage. And then to our sides, we had Team A and Team B. And then to the sides of them, Team C and Team D. So while the first game was going on, they'd hit like whatever. One team hits like 12 rounds. They set up the second game on the fringe setup. And then they just had one camera on a big jib. And they would just slide the camera down the line, picking up each perspective. It was pretty wild.
That's awesome. That's the kind of event that I really do want to do. That's just having that crowd, having that feedback in. That's the dragon, right? Chasing the dragon. That's the dragon for performance is having that feedback, having that energy behind you. That sounds amazing.
Now, looking at your career thus far, do you feel like you've hit your goals? Like, have you set yourself goals that you wanted to hit, and you're like, I'm going to do this by this date? And like you said, you wanted to give yourself a certain amount of time. Was there certain aspirations that you had that you've since accomplished, or do you feel like there's a lot of things left that you still need to do?
At this point, so yes and no. There's a lot that I still need to do. There's a lot that I still want to do. But I've been very fortunate thus far to do quite well, defying my own expectations to a certain degree. I went full time with casting, as you know, back in June of last year, and I really didn't know how it was going to work out. I moved up here to Philadelphia and decided to devote myself full time. And much to my own surprise, I've actually been able to support myself off of casting quite well since then. Obviously, it's been a little bit of a rough year for a lot of us in the freelance event work industry, because there ain't no events and everything's online. But even with that online, there's a lot more competition for the events themselves, and obviously everyone's struggling to figure out how they're going to organize what, when, where, and how. So to this point, I've been super fortunate. It was a big goal of mine to be able to get to the point where I could do this full time, and I did. And I gave myself that 2 years to sort of figure out the direction and the path, and the path is there, and it's absolutely something that I'm working on and building and improving. And so that goal, yes, I've accomplished it. It's not really a goal that you just accomplish, right? You've got to keep accomplishing it, of being able to pay your bills of casting. But I count myself very fortunate to have gotten to that point, frankly, faster than I necessarily thought I would. So yes, there, but there's a lot of goals left, right? Live audience work, doing it bigger, doing it better, and just generally improving my casting as well, getting to a level. Obviously, you talked about it where you hate the sound of your own voice. I hate the sound of my own voice too, and I'm always going to be my harshest critic. So there are times where that confidence just takes a hit. You have a game where you didn't quite like it, or you're listening back to a demo and you're like, oh, I'm terrible. Why do I even do this? Why does anyone listen to me? But just continuing to improve and hone my craft and develop more aspects of that work as well. I mean, you talked about transitioning to hosting. I actually wound up hosting the last global challenge because our intended host, Davey, wound up getting very sick and couldn't travel, couldn't get to the event. So that was a lot of fun, dipping my toe into the hosting water and just expanding my repertoire a little bit. There's a lot still to do, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And I'm not going to be content with where I'm at anytime soon.
Do you have that same aspiration as many, where you want to, like, you're not going to be happy until you work a major? Or are you going to be Like, you know what? I'm happy with what I've got. Because, like, for a while, for me, it was really hard because I was like, man, I just want to work a major, or I want to work a minor, or I want to work something along those lines. And eventually I just was like, you know what? Not many people get to do this. And,
Yeah.
like, I shouldn't be complaining that I'm in this position. I should be content that I've gotten to where I am and that I get to continue to do what I get to do. So if I never get to do that now, like, I'm at a point now, if I never get to work a major, that's okay. I'm, like, fine with that. I'm happy with where I'm at. Are you the same way?
Yeah. Um, to the major goal specifically, I don't know. Honestly, I'm still early on enough, and there's still enough progressing to do that I think that that's kind of like that's a distant goalpost, if
Mm.
that makes sense. I would love to work a major. That would be mind blowing to work for that kind of an event, that kind of prestige, that kind of weight. Because for me, one of the most exciting things about casting are the narratives and the weight that events have and the storylines of teams. And those are never more impressive, more dramatic, more important than at a major. So that would be a pinnacle, without a doubt, if I could work a major within Counter-Strike. I I don't know that that's ever going to happen. Who knows? It's very far off. I'm still, my big goal going into this year was to try and work like a DreamHack or a DreamHack level event, something of that size and stature. And obviously, that's again probably going to be delayed. Table that for a little while. I don't know. It's just such a strange year. Um, so I think I've still got many goal points between now and then, um, where it's weird for me to even talk about like working a major. Like it'd be incredible. And if there was an NA1 trying to get involved in the minor or something along those lines, would probably be a more realistic goal to attain. Still difficult for sure, but more within the realm of possibility. And then we were talking about it a bit. Valorant's cropping up. There's stuff going on with Valorant. There's always different games and things changing within the esports scene. So who knows exactly where the future is going to take me? But uh, I don't think I need to work a major to be happy with myself, but it would be an incredible goal to achieve.
Yeah, I kind of think I'm in the same boat as you. It's kind of like it'd be neat, but I'm okay. I'm lucky that I've gotten to do this for as long as I've gotten to, and I'm just kind of I don't want to say I'm riding the wave because obviously I put
It's
in a
all
lot of work.
down from here.
I've been putting in the work, but I mean, we'll see what happens as the landscape changes. Obviously, coronavirus has really turned things on its head, and people who can work from home are now incredibly appealing vis-a-vis us. People who have at-home equipment like nice microphones and webcams and the ability to produce even is a huge help.
Yep.
These things are things that up until 2 months ago were not on people's radar. And I've gotten emails and requests from a couple different people saying like, hey, what are your rates? And I think the sticker shock sometimes is there because they're like expecting it to be cheap because they're used to big names and they know how much those guys cost to fly them out and do an event in person, but they don't realize that all the years that they've been doing these in person events, the online stuff's continued in the background. So yeah, your landscape has doubled and tripled in price, and day rates went from $200 to $300 5 years ago to now $5,000 for a weekend. That's obviously changed a lot, but in the same sense, $5 a map, which used to be like going rate at one point in time or nothing, is now like going up to like 50. So things have changed a lot in the years since, like, we've both grown together, I guess is what I'm really trying to say. LAN grew and online grew too, but they just didn't realize that online was growing. So now they're coming back to online and they're going, well, what do you mean? It's not this cheap? And I'm like, no, like that's a little frustrating.
The other reality on online, I suspect there's a huge temptation for companies to cheap out because there is an infinite pool of people who will be willing to give it a shot and cast, for nothing, frankly, if you're going to do it. But you're going to pay for your quality. You're going to pay for the experience level that you're getting. People who have experience, who have worked events, who have been casting for a while, who have that, I don't want to say pedigree because that feels like a really weird way to ascribe
That's
it.
fair.
Experience in it, and a little bit of knowledge of how to run a production or how to intro and outro, how to plug, those kind of things, valuable skills. It's going to cost a little bit more. So, especially with online where you're not making that sort of base investment of an airline ticket and hotel, I feel like when TOs think about that, it's like, okay, it kind of makes sense to just go with the more expensive guy since we're already going to be investing this much amount. It's not that much bigger of a pool, but I suspect the temptation is there when it's online to go for the cheapest option that you think you can reasonably get away with. And you're right, it has changed. There are people who've been making a living off this online work. There's, Mountain Dew League for us is an online production. That is my bread and butter these days. ESEA has been very good to me and very kind to me. And there's an expectation of real pay for real work.
Yeah, and I think that's totally fair. I'm getting a little frustrated with predatory companies coming in and saying like, "Oh, we're offering you the experience
exposure."
Like we've literally gone back to 2015. We're back to online events. Everything's online. Orgs and tournament organizers are taking advantage of up and coming casters or taking advantage of hype. Like I've gotten a couple of offers to do some Valorant stuff and the rate was 0. And they're like, well, we can grow together. Like, I don't care, man. Like, this is my job. I'm not trying to just build your brand with mine. That's cool. And I get that there's value for some people in that, but like, I value my time and that's not going to happen. Speaking of valuing our time, Mike, our time here is through. So Thank you so much for joining me on the show this week. I feel like we could probably do another episode in the future, depending on what happens with your career as the year goes on. Maybe we'll jump back into this and you'll be talking about all these cool events you got to do post-coronavirus. But I guess we will wait and see. Anything you want to say before we close out the show?
Thanks for having me on. It's a fun show. I've been listening to some of the episodes and definitely do stay tuned for all future Mark endeavors, all future Bach episodes, all his interview guests. Thanks for having me on, Mark. It was a pleasure.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked the show, make sure you follow us here on Twitch or head on over to our YouTube channel as well. You can subscribe there, youtube.com/nerdstreetgamers, NERDST Gamers. Same for our social media, NERDST Gamers. You can also head to our website. Guess where it is? NERDST Gamers, nerdstreetgamers.com to find out any information about upcoming events and tournaments we have going on in your local communities. Thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you next time.